Hello all, I thought it was time that I make a quick tutorial about how I make my photogrammetry models such as this tube vent in South London. I'm going to show you how I take the photos, how I process them in reality capture, and then how I upload all of that to Sketchfab. But the first thing we need to do is head down to South London and start getting photos.
I'd like to show you how I'm going to photograph this tube vent behind me, this small building which is a vent down to the underground station or the tube line below. I'm going to show you how I'm going to take the photographs and you can watch along with me. Key things I'm thinking about is I want to do a big loop of photos around this building. I might need to go across to the other side of the road and take some photos back looking across the road and not get run over by this crane that's passing. That's unexpected. Never have your headphones in when you're shooting these things because you won't hear stuff like that. I'm going to work landscape unless I get into a tight spot, and then I might switch to portrait. So there's one photo. I've got my camera in auto mode. I haven't got time to worry about setting the settings manually. There's things moving behind now, so just wait. Big truck, wait for him to pass. Next photo, next photo. Shooting as I move around. Each photo's overlapping with the last. It's better to shoot more photos than I need. So here, I can't see all the buildings, so I've switched to portrait. Still trying to get all of the building in shot. Here I can't get all the building in shot, so I'm going to do possibly two photos. Waiting for the big red truck to pass. I got two photos. Nip in here. Another truck passing. There we are. Now I can get the whole building in shot again. These stairs are really useful because it means I can get some elevation now and get a much better view onto the building looking down. As the cars go past the back, I'm going to shoot extra photos. So lots of photos through here. Trying not to get this big pillar in shot, and then I'm just looking what's the best way of carrying on my loop. I think I'll go down the stairs and carry on this way. Still shooting portrait. When I'm shooting portrait, I make sure to take extra photos because there's going to be less overlap between each photo. Because obviously in portrait, the photos aren't as wide. Now I can come back a bit and switch back to landscape. This building's got a lovely texture to it, so it should process really nicely because the photogrammetry software will find lots of alignment points. Switching back to portrait. Now from down here I don't have a good view of the grille on the front of this vent, which is why I'm going to go across the road later and zoom back in. I'm getting back to where we started, which is good, so just keeping an eye on that. So click, 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 literally every step I take, new photo. Almost back at the beginning. Big truck, wait. Okay. And we're back to the start. Brilliant. So that is one loop of photos. Probably took about 50 photos there, maybe more. Now I'm looking and I'm thinking, where do I need more detail? Where do I need more photos? There's a box on the front. I definitely want to get more photos of that. I want to get photos of the ground around the vent as well. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to shoot another loop looking down towards the bottom. On the back side there was a door. I want to get that area. And then once I've done all of that, I'll go across the road and I'll get some photos looking at that grille from a better angle. I'm going to start from a known position on my start loop because all these photos need to join up, remember. So start taking photos. I'm just going to work in taking photos down towards the ground because I now want a loop that includes the ground and looking down onto the ground slightly. It's just work my way back so that the whole thing is in shot again and I join up with my original loop and then carry on back in, back down to the ground. taking photos of the ground. Here, where that door and staircase is, I want to get a bit of extra detail here, so I'm going to just pause here and go back and redo this little staircase and door. So just do a little semicircle or quarter circle of photos around this area, just focusing on the staircase. There we are. And then also, particularly with stairs, often it helps just to crouch down and go underneath. And this is where a camera with a tilting screen comes in helpful. Just work the camera underneath the staircase. Now going back to my floor coverage, so I was around here. Just carry on working my way around, looking at the floor. Just going to nip into this corner. Make sure I get some photos of the box. And again, I'm going to work back, join up to my original loop again. Make sure I give the software plenty of ways of aligning all my sets of photos. Working back in on this box. I'm going to go above the box, maybe from a few sides. Again, working around the box. Click, 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 and then carrying on with the ground. Go from here. And then we should be joining up with where we started. Just click, click while looking up. The other thing I always think about is there anywhere nearby where I can get up high and shoot down onto the thing I'm interested in? There isn't really anywhere here, unless you know one of these flats and we could go up there. So I think the best we can do is go far away now. Often getting far away and zooming back in will get you some of those angles that really help resolve the top of an object. Okay, over the road. So we're across the road now. Normally, if I was shooting something like this, or even a small object where I wanted to go back into a road, I would literally take photos while walking backwards across the road. That's not possible here because this road's really busy and we will die. So I've got to be a bit more careful about how this is going to join up with the photos I've taken from the other side. If it doesn't align automatically, we can manually align stuff in the software. So experience has taught me there are ways of fixing it if it goes wrong. So I am waiting for a bit of a break in the traffic, particularly from the larger vehicles, and then I'll start shooting. Basically, I'm trying to do a line of photos along this pavement, looking back at the object, almost like another arc. One last thing I always do after taking a set of photos for photogrammetry, so I might be shooting multiple things on one day, finish by taking a photo of your hand, and then when you come sort your photos afterwards, you've got a really easy place to cut and group your photos.
Right, we're back in front of the computer. We've taken our photos and I've copied them all off from the memory card of the camera locally. Created myself a folder for this particular object called Voxel Tube Vent, and inside a lot of helpful folders that I might need later on. But the most important one to start with is this photos folder. I've separated out the raw photos and the JPEGs that I've just taken. I always shoot both raw and JPEG in case I need to use either later on. Currently I'm working with just the JPEGs because that's all reality capture supports for my camera. You could convert the RAWs to JPEG if you want, obviously, but for simplicity let's just stick with the JPEGs for now. So you can see I took about 413 photos. I've already filtered some out that weren't in focus or had motion blur in them, but I took about, let's say, just over 400 photos. You can see them all here of the tube vent as I was marching around. Particularly the bad ones was that end section from across the road, and there were a few other issues that I'll talk about at the end that have come about from testing with these photos. But anyway, there's my JPEGs in that folder. Next, we're going to head into reality capture. I tend to use both Agisoft Metashape and I use reality capture, but I do prefer reality capture at the moment. It does give better results, but it is harder to learn. But let's dive in at the deep end and use reality capture. If you're just starting out, maybe have a look at Metashape. They do a 30-day trial, which is a good way of learning how to do photogrammetry. So we're in reality capture. First thing we need to do is add the photos. In the workflow tab at the top, just click this add folder button. Browse to either your JPEGs or RAW files if you're using those instead, and hit OK to add that whole folder. It might buffer for a while, but then it will say it's added images, 413 images. There we are, it's added all our images, and you could even expand that and see them all listed below. Next, we're going to save the file. So let's just save it in our folder. I'm going to save it as a new, overwrite this one, which is a fresh file. So I've saved the file, and then we need to start aligning the photos. So next, go to the alignment tab, and we're going to hit this align images button. Next to it, there is a settings option, and it will list. If you click on it, you'll get a list of settings on the left here. If you're not seeing your screen set up quite the way I am, these little panel buttons up the top here allow you to lay out your panels, obviously in different ways. I always use this one, which is just a simple list view on the left, and then your main 3D view on the right. If you do more complex stuff like aligning photos, you can switch to 6 panels and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. Looking at these settings over here, the key ones to think about are this image overlap setting, which is basically how much of the image, the photos, it assumes are overlapping when it's looking for alignment points. Basically, if you set it on low, then it doesn't need much overlap between the photos. So maybe if you've not taken enough photos, or you moved a lot between them, then low will help, but you might not get as accurate a result. Medium is the default. High, it's looking for a really high overlap between the photos, so hopefully you've taken a lot, but you'll get a lot higher accuracy. I tend to leave it on medium unless it's not aligning the photos very well, in which case I'll drop down to low. Next one, image downscale factor is basically how much it shrinks the photos before starting to look for alignment points. Again, the default is 2, it's basically shrinking it by half. If you've got a lot of photos, i.e. thousands, it's worth going to say 4, so shrinking them down to quarter size. But as a default for 2, that's what I tend to stick with. So now we've looked at the settings for alignment, we could just hit the align button and it will start aligning images. Once the alignment is finished, you should end up with something that looks like this. It might take minutes for your alignment to work, it could take hours, depends on how fast your computer is and how many photos. But you'll end up on the left hand side here, you should see a component and it will tell you how many photos it managed to align. If it struggled with the alignment, you might end up with multiple components. You might even end up with a group saying that it's got lots of small components and one big component. There are ways of doing manual alignment in reality capture, but I'm not going to go into that in this tutorial. Let's just assume that your alignment has worked really well and it's worked out where all the cameras were. So here's our scene. You can see the little white dots, if I zoom in, are actually cameras. If I click on one, there's a photo. There's a photo, one of the first ones we did, looking at the whole building. Each one of those is a camera position. And you can almost see my track as I moved around the building, going up and down the little stairs, all the way around. And then going back in and photographing, looking down at the ground, and then the close-up sections of the box and the stairs on the back. And hopefully if we go over to the other side of the road, you can see all the photos I took from the other side of the road as well. And it's managed to align those in, which is great. All the dots that you see are the, let's call them alignment points, where it's found matches between the photos. So we get this kind of point cloud representing our object. First thing we need to do is shrink in this big white box. This is called the bounding box. And this is going to tell reality capture what we want to process into a model. So I'm going to look down at the top of the model. If it helps, go to the View tab and switch to Top. Find your object, just drag in these little edge dots to frame what you want to process, rotate it so that the bounding box matches the alignment, the rotation of the object. And let's shrink it a bit further. We don't really want much ground, so I'm going to shrink it in quite close to the object. There we are. Once done that, switch back to perspective and just check that the height of the bounding box is suitable, and it is. So it's just a bit higher than the object and it's a bit lower than the ground. So once we've done that, we're happy with our bounding box. Next quick thing to do, go to the tools menu where it says set ground plane, set ground to reconstruction region. Basically it aligns the bounding box to the grid so that the thing is straight, basically. Saves us having to straighten it later when we upload it to Sketchfab. So we've done that. We can now make a model from our alignment. So if you go to mesh model, this is the big button we're interested in. It says normal detail. That's going to process what we see here into a 3D mesh. If you look in the settings for this, key one is this image downscale factor. Basically how much, again like alignment, how much it shrinks the images before trying to make a model out of them. Default is 2. I'm not using a huge number of photos, so I'm just going to leave it on 2. If you turn that value up, it will take less time to process. Turn it down, it obviously takes more time because the images are bigger. So we can hit the normal detail button and wait for it to process. Once your mesh has finished processing, again it could take a long time depending on the number of photos or how powerful your computer is, you'll almost certainly see this warning. Don't worry about it. It says not enough video memory. It's because the output mesh that it's generated is huge. It is many triangles. Just ignore that for now. Hit close. We can see our resultant mesh here. It's not actually rendering as a mesh, it's rendering as many points. So the first thing we need to do is expand this component, and you will see this new model has been generated, and it is 93 million triangles, and that's why it can't render it. So the first thing we'll do is go to the tools menu again and look for this option called simplify. Click on it and we get some settings on the left hand side. The only key feature we need here is this target triangle count setting. This is what we want to turn it into in terms of number of triangles. I tend to target about 1 million for a simple object for Sketchfab, 2 million for something that's a bit more complicated like a building or a room. So here I'm just going to set it to 1 million and hit the simplify button, and it will go off and it will reduce our model down to 1 million triangles. It will keep the original, so don't worry, it's not deleting or destroying that. We'll get a new model with 1 million triangles. Okay, once the simplify tool is finished, we start to get a sense of how well our model has worked. I'm not super happy around the top. I think the bottom is good, around the bottom half where we were close to it, but we are seeing some alignment errors around the top. There are potentially things we could do to improve that, but for now I'm going to leave it. I think the key thing that I'm frustrated about is I forgot really what I should have done is gone further away over to this side and got more photos looking at the top from over here and possibly over here as well, not just from looking at the grill from the other side of the street. Really could have done with more photos from over here, given that we couldn't get above this object. And that's why looking at the top of it, it's a little bit messy up here. But down below it's good. Staircase again has got a few problems. Potentially could have fixed that by walking up the stairs and taking photos down onto the steps, but I didn't feel happy doing that given it's not my building. I didn't really want to go climbing the stairs. But there are sections I do really like. The patterning of the sort of the concrete grid lines have come out nicely. You can see that little pipe. And then looking at the box on this side, there's nothing I need to fix on that really. It's nice and smooth. I can see the little handles and things, so I'm happy with that. So I think it's good enough for now to move on. The next thing we need to do is to generate a texture for this object. To do that, we're going to go back to this mesh model tab and look for the big texture button. Again, if you click the settings option, you can see the settings for the textures. We just want one texture, so check maximal texture count is set to 1. For Sketchfab, for a single object, I tend to go for the maximum sensible texture size, which is what I call what's called an 8K texture, 8,192 pixels square. So just check it's set to that. You could go a bit smaller if you want. And then next one is just check this large triangle removal threshold. This is basically how big a triangle can be before it doesn't generate texture information for it. If you've got the base under the model like this one that you don't really want any texture on, going for something around 20 is possibly sensible, because most of this is small triangles apart from the base, which is quite large triangles, so I don't really need texture there. If you have large triangles over your object, particularly on like the roofs of buildings, things like that, you might want to set this a bit higher because you do want texture generated for those large triangles. Anyway, those are the three most important settings. Once we've done that, hit the texture button and wait again. Okay, once texturing is finished, it should switch to texturing mode. If it hasn't, just go to this view tab, and here you've got ways of viewing your model. Before we were on solid, so we were just seeing the mesh without a texture on it. If you switch it to suite, you will see the textured object. Again, looking at the top, you can see where we haven't managed to photograph the top of the building. It can't really do much with that. And again, you can see where the grill is slightly misaligned. However, once it's textured, it's actually a bit harder to spot the problems. It looks a little bit better. And then zooming in down here, it's all looking really good. And particularly you can see why I was photographing the floor, because if we look down at the floor, this is all really nicely textured. There's no loss of detail or blurriness around the outside of the object, which I really like. So it's good, it's nicely textured, I'm happy with that. So the next thing we're going to do is export this model with its texture so that I can then upload it to Sketchfab. I'll look under the Mesh Model tab in the Export section, and then this option, Dense Mesh Model, click it. Choose a file format. I always choose OBJ for my exports from Reality Capture, so just check it's OBJ because it's the simplest option. I'm just going to overwrite an earlier version of this. And then in here, these are the export options. Just check that the texture is set to JPEG because that's perfect for Sketchfab. So I'm going to leave that on JPEG, hit OK, and it will export our file. Once that's finished, we can check what it's exported. Look in the folder. What you get is a OBJ file, which is the mesh that basically contains everything to do with the model. You get a JPEG, which is the texture for the model, and then this MTL file is a material file that you always get with a OBJ file, and it's basically the material information that sits between the model and the texture. So those are the key things, three things we need. You can ignore this Reality Capture info file. We don't need that for Sketchfab. So now we can look at putting our object up onto Sketchfab for the world to see. First thing I'm going to do is select the material file, the OBJ file, and the JPEG. So that's those three files. Right click, and using compression tool of your choice, add it to a new zip file. Let them zip up. Once your zip file has been created, we're going to open Sketchfab in a web browser, and then top right, hit this upload button. Go back to our folder with our zip in it, drag and drop that into Sketchfab and hit upload files. Depending on the type of zip, you might even see the files inside the zip. Give it a name, a sensible name. And then a description, what it is, something about it, something useful for people, maybe where it is, things like that. How many, I tend to annotate it with how many photos I took, with what camera and when, particularly for heritage objects. That might be really useful for people. And then also don't forget to set a category for what this object is. Let's choose architecture for this thing. And then if you want to make it freely downloadable by all, set that over here. Once you've done that, don't really need to change any of the other options. Hit save. So once it's finished processing, it will stop whizzing over here. We can hit this edit 3D settings button. Once that's loaded, we can start changing some of the settings for how it's going to be viewed on Sketchfab. I like to set shading to shadeless, i.e. no extra lights in the scene, because there tends to be enough lights on baked into the texture for the thing I photographed anyway. So I'll set that to shadeless. I tend to change the background color to something sensible that matches all my other scans. In lighting, I tend to add a little drop shadow underneath by setting ground shadows on and then just a baked AO. And if it's not in the right place, just scrub this little height option to the right height so it lines up, and you'll get a little rendering thing underneath. And then the last thing I do is go to post-processing and then turn on sharpness and set that to 0.25 just to make the object a bit sharper. Once that's done and it's centered, hit this Save View button and that will generate a thumbnail for the model. Check that you're happy with it. Exit back to the properties page, and then if you're ready, you can hit this Publish button down the bottom. So let's have a look at the model and what it looks like. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. More advanced tutorials coming from me soon, so I'll see you in the next one.